Yeah. All right. And we're off. So,
Okay, thank you very much for the kind presentation. Before I begin, let me say hello to a couple of friends who are online. To the others here, I will say hello personally. I refer to Patrick Murray and Anna Carabelli. Maybe there are others, but I've not seen their names. Before I begin, let me tell you how this paper is born. I am attempting since some years, and I'm not sure I will succeed, to collect some papers of mine on Marx, mainly about value, money, surplus value, and crisis. At the beginning, when the idea was proposed to me, I thought it was very easy because I just had to collect my papers. Then I realized that it was not so, not only because the papers had to be rewritten also for the English and so on, but also because to make an argument, I had to split the articles and re-articulate the whole thing. Doing this, I realized that I had to change something, add something, so it is becoming an original book. At present, the draft is 1,000 pages, which is, of course, absurd, but it's far from being completed. And to be frank, I'm not sure, first, if I will ever finish it, and second, if I finish it, if it will be accepted by any publisher, any reasonable publisher. But, you know, we are in a world in which, in case, I can just publish this rubbish on the internet. I was, at a certain point, I was revising for the nth time a paper on Sraffa. There was the issue about the invariable measure of value, the standard commodity in Sraffa as something of that role. So I had to look at that literature. It happened that I found new documents in Manchester on that by Sraffa and others. So I went there and I spent a lot of time doing this. And this is the paper that I presented yesterday at Goldsmith. But of course, there is the problem of the relationship of Marx with Riccardo's search for an invariable measure of value. And as a consequence, how Marx assesses all the issue about the measure of value in dialogue and in criticism against Bailey, not only against Riccardo. And so at a certain point, I stopped this writing about Sraffa and said, okay, I give a look 2 or 3 days to this whole discussion by Marx in the theories of surplus value. So I took the theories of surplus value in English. My idea, you may ask that after, because I have no time here to explain to you why. My idea that I matured in the last 20 years about the English translations of Marx is that they are science fiction, even when they are good. Not when they are bad, also when they are good. They are good translations, but they are science fiction. But this is not the case of the theories of surplus value, because in the case of the theories of surplus value, there is only one translation, at least the translation I know, and it's not science fiction, it is simply horrible. So I had to try to retranslate for my own use 60, 70 pages of the theory of surplus value, more or less. I took 6 months, and this I have for my own use. It's not a sensible thing to share, but on that I based this this research, because this research is about essentially this notion of absolute value, which is almost unknown in the English literature, but also in the non-English literature, it is not very well known. And the problem is how it is understood. First, really exists in Marx a notion of absolute value, what does it mean, etc. Having done this for the theories of surplus value, since I was running, I started to look at absolute value in all the writings of Marx, economic writings, of course, checking the German. But at that point, why stop there? So I look at the secondary literature. And since I had to deal with German, why not to look also with the German literature? Of course, I cannot say that the Germans do not translate Marx German in the right way, because when they quote Marx in German, and it is perfect. But the point is to see if they, the authors I consider, understood something and or not. And in fact, I found some good interpretations, especially in the Italian, the French, and the German literature. But these interpretations were not completely satisfying. Also, of course, if I found them all completely satisfying, why spend all this time doing this? I discovered that I also made some error in considering the relationship between some of these categories, though I think they were not serious in the sense that they were not impeding my understanding of Marx, but I had to change something. So what I ended with was with another example of my personal methodology, which I exemplified to you with this quote from Bertolt Brecht. There is this page in which there is these phrases. It was asked to Mr. K. Koiner, I think. What was he doing? Mr. K answered, I am working hard preparing my next error. So I'm pretty convinced that this is an error, but first it is a new error, and second, please respect the hard work. Why I did this? Also because what will be the end of this? I have a pretty huge draft, which is not a book, not an article, something in between. But then my friend and co-author Tommaso Redolfi Riva convinced me to put a shortened version, which is shorter than the big thing, but not short, into this book we are editing, Marx Key Concepts. And these are the various contributions there. It will not be easy to follow me, but as Marx said, there is no royal road to science. You know, the door is there, so you can find an escape. The title is, What is it? What is good in these pages in the theory of surplus value is that sometimes Marx writes in English. Of course, in the English translations, without telling it, the English of Marx is correct. That's not something that I like, that you should put what Marx wrote and then say in some way where there are the errors and how you should rewrite it. this question, which is the title of the paper, what is it, is from one of these English parts of the theory of surplus value. Marx asked, what is it that makes labor the unity exhibited in money in circulation, true value as the universal power of exchangeability? As I told you, I look at the Economic Manuscript 61-63, but also the text before. In this shorter version, I am very quick on this other text. I will look especially at the Grundrisse, Contribution to Political Economy, the Urtext, and later Capital. The phrase by Marx where there is this question, what is it, is this one. What is it, I think, appears 2 times. Marx writes, the unity of the 2 commodities, A and B, is, at the first view, their exchangeability. They are exchangeable objects. As exchangeable objects, they are magnitudes of the same denomination. But this, their existence as an exchangeable object, must be different from their existence as their values in use. What is it? What is it is absolute value. And they think that absolute value is a crucial theoretical intermediate link between, on one side, intrinsic value. Marx uses the term intrinsic value also in Capital, but it does not use this many times. The link between intrinsic value on one side and capital as value in process in the other side. Riccardo speaks of absolute value, Bailey too, critically. Me too have often referred to absolute value. The error I made is that I identified in the past intrinsic value with absolute value. I will show you that they are not the same. Even though I identified them nominally, in fact, in my argument, I think they are pretty distinguished, even though I didn't say that. I published in 2018 an article whose true title, the title in Italian, would be Is There Life on Marx? Since I used this somewhere else, I don't remember where, when I published this article in English, the title goes from David Bowie to Bob Dylan. It becomes Forever Young, question mark, and it is practically a rereading, especially of Capital Volume 1. Mine is an exercise in reading and interpretation, not in reconstruction. I make a distinction between these 3 things. So reading what it is reading seriously an author. It is an exegesis, which reveals ambivalence, contradictions, ambiguities, and all that. Interpretation is the attempt to find a coherent line, either in the text or in the many texts, within the author himself or herself. Since I am one of those who think that in Marx, not everything works, and that it is not possible to resolve his problems remaining completely in his approach, I think that a reconstruction is needed. Reconstruction means to reconstruct his theory of value, explaining where you change, what are the key notions, etc. To complicate the things, the term reconstruction and interpretation are, for example, used in the German literature in the opposite way. Reconstruction has been used very much in the 70s and 80s, exactly to apply to a rereading of Marx that makes coherent Marx according to his own principle. To say one name, Hans-Georg Backhaus started his Materialen on value theory with this idea in mind. So the first 2 installments those articles wanted to reconstruct Marx. And he began the third installment, there are 4 installments, saying, look, I was wrong. This is not possible, and Marx cannot be made coherent. So we have to go, he said, with Marx, against Marx. It is more or less this latter my position. The paper, but not the exposition, includes 2 appendixes. One is about Marx lost in translation. There I put the German terms and how I would translate these German terms differently than usual translations. The second appendix is Marx being lost in interpretation. It is this survey, and I will not say almost nothing here about the various interpretations. So let us begin from Bailey as criticized by Marx in Theories of Surplus Value, 2nd volume. According to Bailey, value in exchange is first specified as the relative power of purchasing other goods, not commodities, goods. It is the ratio of use values amounts. Marx says in Riccardo, value in exchange is another thing. It's comparative or relative value of commodities, not of goods like in Bailey. And this relative value depends on the labor time bestowed in producing them, the labor contained, if you wish. Riccardo has a notion of absolute value, and Marx understands, in my view, that for Riccardo, absolute value is a relative value. Absolute value is a specific kind of comparative value. It is the comparative value of the commodity which is to be compared in terms of the invariable standards. Bailey criticized Riccardo, arguing that value is a relation between objects, the things, the goods, not a positive result of a definite quantity of labor, the labor contained notion. So Bailey says against Riccardo, Riccardo has a notion of intrinsic value, which is an absolute value as if it exists on its own within the single commodity in isolation. Marx, to both authors, counters that these notions are wrong. There is a relativity, as Bailey rightly says, but this relativity refers to all of them against social labor, the social labor which is allocated in a market society, etc. And Marx writes, Riccardo should be criticized for the opposite reason than Bailey, because Riccardo too often forgets absolute value. So for this Marx, absolute value is a notion to be defended. There is already in the 2nd volume of the Theories of Surplus Value, a criticism of the Riccardo search on the invariable measure of value, but I skip for reason of time. In the third part, in the 3rd volume of the Theories of Surplus Value, Marx speaks of and insists on the unity behind the commodities, so to speak, Einheit. This Einheit, this unity is almost always translated in English as substance. According to my point of view, unity and substance are strong words and should be maintained as they are. Sometimes one-time unity is translated as entity, which is another thing altogether. In general, not only here, but also in Capital, Marx's investigations on value begins questioning how value is manifested phenomenally in circulation. This is an Erscheinen. Erscheinen is appearing, to appear as a phenomenal manifestation. There is another verb, which is scheinen, which is something different. It is a semblance, something seen. This is very often a delusion, a necessary delusion, but it is a delusion, an illusion. Unfortunately, in English, Erscheinen is translated as appear. And you have almost all the authors who use the terms appearance, forms of appearance, and you don't understand if they are speaking of Erscheinen or Scheinen. The result of the inquiry by Marx about value will be that value is a processual concept that cannot be frozen in any of its determination. You can say value is labor, value is commodity, but can say value is labor because value is a form of a manifestation. But you can say value is a commodity, value is money. This one and the other, but it is especially value and money in motion. Marx says the values of commodities cannot be shown by their particular use value, but their value is for me their intrinsic value of commodities. These values of commodities must manifest phenomenally in the relation in which these other values exchange for those commodities. What is absolute, says Marx? In fact, it is use value. Here, absolute means independent. Once it is independent, can stay independent always. Is use value. Value instead is eminently relative. When you speak of value, you speak of something relative. Bailey is a fetishist because he attributes the social power of exchangeability to things as natural objects, not the individual things in the case of Bailey, all together in concert. But this is fetishism. I don't want to explain it here, but you will see later that I make a distinction, which is not often done, between fetishism and fetish. Fetish character is one thing, fetishism is another one. And this distinction in Marx is crucial. For Marx, against Bailey, the relation is not between things, not between objects, nor it is a relation like in Riccardo, commodities against the invariable measure of value. What Marx says is at issue in this relation is the exhibition. Exhibition stands for Darstellung, usually translated as representation. It is wrong. I used the representation for a long while, but it is at least 15 years that I stopped. What is at issue is the exhibition, the Darstellung of portions of social labor in the unity of production and circulation, and in the outer expression of production. There is a paper which will appear in much longer version. The book will never be published by me, published in a collection edited by Mosley and Tony Smith, and that chapter is called Loss in Translation. All this argument about exhibition, Darstellung, expression, etc., there is explained in detail. What is important that you get is that here I am talking of two things, Marx is talking of two things at the same time. That the exhibition of this portion of social labor is first an exhibition in the unity of production and circulation. Here we are looking at the circularity of the process. But on the other hand, this circularity is an expression from the inner to the outer. For the moment, let us say from production to circulation, but we will see that it is, in the end, it will not be very precise. So I am giving a particular meaning to the word expression. I do not change the translation, but for expression, I mean from the inner to the outer, a linear movement. The two things are not so obviously compatible. Marx's claim is that value is relative. I said it 2 minutes ago. But this does not mean that you cannot have a concept of absolute value. It seems contradictory. So what I am talking about? Marx more or less says this, that in exchange, commodities impart to their value a separate or autonomous Dasein. Dasein is a German term which may be translated as existence, but it is particularly complicated. So translating it directly to existence may obscure something. So I prefer just to put forward being there so that the reader understands that this is a technical term in a sense. This separate or autonomous being there, or existence if you wish, must be different and independent from the body of their own values. The argument by Marx is that money grows out of commodities through the imagined anticipation in price, through a Vorstellung. This is a representation. When Marx speaks of representation, he is speaking of what the subject imagine, anticipate notionally. And this happens in price, in the price tag, for example. The commodities are exchanged, and when they are exchanged, there is ex ante this notional materialization, which has to be or not to be realized. There are expectations that may be met or may not be met. At this point of the exposition by Marx, commodities altogether are one, all parts of the same unity. They are discrete amounts of a unitary substance. This Einheit, this unity, is anterior to the actual circulation on the market, at least as a Vorstellung. At the same time, Marx says, as value, the product must be the embodiment of social labor, Verkörperung der gesellschaftlichen Arbeit. Like for fetishism and the fetish character, I anticipate to you that I will come back to this definition, Verkörperung der gesellschaftlichen Arbeit. For the moment, I leave it there. This is just what Marx says. We have to understand what he does mean. When they are this embodiment as value of social labor, Marx says, they are immediately convertible from one use value into any other, like money. Then Marx says, only through this alienation, externalization, individual labor is exhibited as its opposite, as social labor. Why I put here alienation / externalization? Because Veräußerung is usually translated alienation. It is not a wrong translation, but it may have, and in some cases it is pretty crucial, the meaning of externalization. This was seen long time ago by Chris Arthur in his book Dialectics of Labor on the young Marx. I'm still reading what Marx is writing. The commodity must have this universal expression, as I told you, before it is alienated, externalized. This is textual. Before sie verrostet ist, my pronunciation of German probably is horrible. The exhibition at this point is there already when money serves as a measure of value, so before actual exchange, and it is there in the expression of the value of the commodity in its price. And when Marx says this, You always ask, but it is price ex ante, price ex post. And Marx sometimes says ex ante is ideally, ex post is really, etc. Like here, that he says it is only through sale, however, that the commodity acquires its adequate expression as exchange value. It is only through sale. The first transformation is just a theoretical process. The second transformation is an actual one. Again, the two things are written in this way, but of course there is a problem, and Marx knows about the problem. For 2 or 3 things, I left something to dig upon. So let us start with Verausterung. Verausterung, instead of alienation, very sometimes depicts a divestment. Actually, sometimes it is translated as divestment in the current English translation. Something like an undressing, an externalization, as Riccardo put it. From my point of view, what is expressed in this theories of surplus value, but also in Capital, when Marx on this topic speaks of Verausterung, what he is speaking of is about a disembodiment of the ghostly objectivity of value from the commodity produced. The commodity is being produced, it is an objectification of labor, but you can get this objectification anywhere. So it is a ghostly objectivity, but it is stuck into the use value. Use value is not ghostly, but value is ghostly. Value is like the soul of that commodity. It is released and it seized use value of money as its own external body. So there is an disembodiment from the commodity and the possession of the body of another commodity, which will be universal equivalent and then money. Some of you may be surprised and say, but what am I reading? What am I reading? Das Kapital or a Gothic novel? It is a Gothic novel. We are strictly speaking of a possession. It is the coming into being or the coming into existence of the ghost or of the spectre, if you prefer, of value in the body of money as a commodity. And this is what's there when there is money as money. Money as money says, it is textual, value embodied. When you speak the translations of Marx in English, but also almost all the English writing Marxists, also the Marxists everywhere in the world, you have the notion of labor embodied or lavoro incorporato in Italian. It's non-existent in Marx if you speak of abstract labor. Abstract labor is not labor embodied. There is a labor embodied in Marx. The labor embodied is the concrete labor, which is embodied in the use value produced. The abstract labor is enthalten, is contained in the commodity. They are two different things. So I stopped using labor embodied for abstract labor and substituted with labor contained. This money as money, which is value embodied, the value embodied is actually there. In this point, in the first serious Italian translation of Capital, it was not written value embodied, it was written labor embodied. That gives you the idea how the translations are driven by what one thinks to read. This money as money, this value embodied is the fetish. I anticipated that the fetish is one thing, if the fetishism is another one. What is the difference? The fetish is the thing which is genuinely, truly, socially endowed with social powers. It is not false. It is true. Take money, gold as money. Gold as money is a fetish, and it is truly endowed with social power. What is fetishism? Thinking that the social powers are due to the fact that gold is a material thing in any historical social situation. So if these social powers are mistakenly assumed to belong to things as if by nature, this is a fetishist illusion. Now, the best authors very often didn't have, the best interpreters, this distinction, but almost never made errors. That is, they use fetishism for everything, but this is not true for everybody. So I prefer that we know what we are talking about. Another distinction should be done about reification, which has to do with sake, and thingification. But I don't want to go into this here, but there is an interesting paper by the Japanese scholar about that. What we have seen until now is that there is a dual movement of externalization and possession. Value as now, money as money, autonomous existence, and it is separate from its value. So value is the absolute value, the being there of value as a given amount of social labor time. Marx says here there is no quantitative determination, only qualitative identity. Value, this is just the text. Value itself, value exhibits itself in free shape, in freie Gestalt, as an outer exchange value. So exchange value is this other commodity, alongside the use value. So there's the use value in which it is embedded, and there is the outer exchange value. This is already ideally anticipated before exchange in its price, says Marx. I add price tag because it is the expectation of price. However, there is one thing that must be understood, at least for me. All this conclusion is valid only because money for Marx is a commodity. Here commodity means product of labor. So gold as money is a commodity. The commodities exchanged with gold as money are commodities. All are product of labor. All are in the same unity. This point of the essentiality of the notion of money as a commodity in Marx is foreign to the interpreters. To me, it is the reason why in Marx there is no contradiction between the circular idea of the Darstellung on one side and the linear idea of the expression. So take what is there on the web in these days, the polemic of Mosley against Hayek. With Hayek, I have two things that makes him very sympathetic to me. First is very undogmatic. Second, it may seem stupid, but for me it is not. We have read the same book. When we read Capital, we have read the same book. We disagree on a lot of things, but it is the same book. It is not the same with Fred. But in both cases, I think that they do not get the relevance of money as a commodity in Marx. Let's talk about this expression absolute value, discussing this absolute. Absolute value is the effective separation of intrinsic value values. They are first the intrinsic values cut away from the commodities use value, and then a second movement embodied in the exterior use value of money as a commodity. This is what Marx calls a materiator. You may say a materialization, but materiator is a German term which was obsolete when Marx used it. It was obsolete when Hegel used it. So I asked to some German friends, philosophers, what was the meaning of materiator? And it is a materialization related to a specific object whose characteristics are able to make them good receipt of this materialization. This process ends in absolute value as nothing but the independent exhibition of intrinsic value through money as a real abstraction. This separation in absolute value. There is an author who perfectly understood what I took almost, I don't know, 30 minutes, 40 minutes to tell you. Yes, Rosa Luxemburg, when she, in her polemic with Bernstein, she has this phrase: Marx's abstraction is not an invention, but a discovery. It does not exist in Marx's head, but in the commodity economy. It has not an imaginary existence, but a real social existence. So real that it can be cut, hammered, waved, and coined. The abstract human labor discovered by Marx is in its developed form none other than money. A few quotes before the debate. Marx writes in English, the absolute expression of its relative value would be its expression in time of labor, and by this absolute expression, it would be expressed as something relative, but in the absolute relation by which it is value. I leave this for you as an exercise, but here there is all that is needed to understand absolute value. I don't see well. No? The real hero, the best philosopher for interpreting this notion of Marx is a Franciscan, an antagonist of St. Thomas Aquinas, San Bonaventure, who wrote Omne respectivum fundatur super aliquo absolute, which means everything relative is grounded in something absolute. And this is what Marx is doing. There is this society unity, which is abstracted over and command human beings, and inside this, grounded in this absolute, there is the relation between individual commodities. Etymologically, absolute comes from absolvere. Ab is made separate from, solvere is detached. So absolute, the word absolutus, as this French philosopher André Doze says rightly, says a relation. So in the same word absolute, the relation is there. In Marx, absolute refers to two circumstances. One, it is that on which I have stressed very much my talk. The fact that the commodity, beyond being use value, is value, but is value only as long as it materializes as exchange value in another commodity, in gold as a commodity, where money acts as the body of value. But from here, there is a shift progressively in Marx going towards chapter 4 in Capital and beyond, according to which absolute means despotic command. It is the fact that the sociality between isolated producers is abstracted from them, controls them, and dominates them. This is in the term, in the couple, at the beginning of chapter 4, übergreifende Subjekt. Übergreifende Subjekt means that capital is the one, it is the subject with the capital S. Übergreifende is overgrasping. all encompassing, but at the same time dominating. And this is the point of absolute. So the absolute value of Marx begins from the commodity and money as money and ends with capital as the one commanding the process. And it is value as process. Is this subject, this value cannot be frozen in the commodity dimension or in the money dimension. It is in becoming. Okay, then there is all the survey about the works of Marx before 61, 63. Then I go into Capital One and the notion of intrinsic value. Intrinsic value, when Marx opens Capital, he says that commodity is a singularity, is an inner duality. It is a use value, but it's also the bearer of exchange value. Exchange values are phenomenally manifested as quantitative ratios between the use values. These ratios seem, it is a shine and arbitrary, but they are not. Bailey thinks that speaking of intrinsic value, valeur intrinsèque, an inner exchange value immanent within the commodity is a contradictio in adjecto, which means it is a situation in which the adjective predicates something contradictory with the noun. So the noun is value, which is relative, and you say that it is intrinsic in the individual commodity. Marx says this opinion of Bailey is wrong. It is a semblance. This cannot be translated immediately into the idea that then the individual commodity is a bearer of value. Why? Because value is a ghost, and Marx says that, quoting Shakespeare, then quickly, value is immaterial within the single commodity, because the crude and tangible objectivity of the single commodity's use value is immediately accessible. But the value objectivity, unlike them quickly, one does not know where to have it. So intrinsic value within the individual commodity is a ghost, is an ethereal presence. This does not mean that value remains ethereal, because intrinsic value becomes absolute value. At that point, through the price anticipation in a monetary economy where money is a commodity, things change, because at that point, the commodity, the so-called substance of the commodity, it is a labor contained, but this labor contained through the price tag is already an anticipated value form. So in this system, for Marx, the substance of value is already monetary. The interpretation stop here. I have no time to go into what follows. I just say that if you are believers in money as a commodity, you don't have problems, because this is coherent. If, however, you have problems with money as a commodity and put away money as a commodity from this, you have something unhappy going on. Take Mosley. Mosley is completely right if he accepts money as a commodity, but he does not. Since he does not, what he has to say is that let us assume that Marx is right, and there is the substance of value before introduction and so on. So we construct a system of Marx that we call Marx, and at this point, what do? We go like a logical empiricist to look at the experience, we see the explanatory power, and then everything goes right. This is also again a methodology. I don't understand that. Take Michael Heinrich. Michael Heinrich realizes that there is the economy. He does not want money as a commodity, but if you don't have money as a commodity, the real problem is that you have in production non-homogeneous labor quantities. So these non-homogeneous labor quantities become homogenized and becomes a unity only in the unity of production and circulation. So you have the unit of production and circulation, but you don't have the movement of expression from the inner to the outer. In both cases, according to my point of view, Marx is lost. There were some guys who understood that these were the problems. In France, there were people who began working with Suzanne de Bournouf in the early 70s. Then during the 70s, they tried to analyze qualitatively value, then arrived at this problematic and realized that at this point you have a split between two worlds, the world of sociality, which is monetary, and the world of use values, which is a black box. At this point, coherently, according to my point of view, they said, bye-bye Marx. Rather, we go into monetary heresies. The names of these guys were Carlo Benetti and Jean Cartelier. I am almost at the end. So if you don't want to go to the way, the only coherent way, which is the Benetti Cartelier way, if you are not satisfied by Mosley or by Michael Heinrich, that's my choice, you have to reconstruct the Marxian system. Because for me, there is no Marxian system if there is not the unity of production circulation, but also the inner to the outer. What do I do? I insist that there must be a macro monetary foundation of the capitalist process of production. This begins with the analysis of the capital relation. The capital relation, it is not just immediate production. It is the buying and selling of labor power plus immediate production. In a capitalist monetary economy, the buying and selling of labor power must be financed. So there is an anticipation of finance. In this view, money is not just universal equity. It is first of all, more fundamentally, the money financing the processes of production. At this point, the substance of value is not something ethereal. It is something that already is monetary, like Marx wanted, but didn't succeed to do so. And you have a circuit of money, which is parallel to the abstraction of labor as a process. I should go into the details. I've done it in other papers, but I have to stop here.
We can come in. We're going to have a Q&A for 2 minutes.
Yes, the slides are at your disposal.
If you want to do,
Yeah, that's on the question.
yeah, we'll do live and then I'll
Yeah, just on the camera. Yeah. You want that I stay?
Yeah. So if you want to write in the chat any questions, we will collect them. Oops.
Yeah. You may.
Do you want to do this?
No, I can see.
Yeah. You come right in. Okay.
Where's the video showing? Can give you a funny example
Stop sharing the screen.
of the confusion among Marxists. Since I am a bit obsessive, I usually work better if I do other things, like listening to music, being on Facebook, doing stupid things. I do not communicate. Or on Twitter. Sometimes I make quiz on Twitter. I posted a quiz on Tuesday, it worked. And I asked, who wrote this? I didn't have many answers. One was Rubin. Rubin is always. But the second was. Who wrote what? Yeah? Who wrote what? Yes, the phrase was something like this. Who wrote the phrase that saying that value is produced in exchange is a formulation which is too summary, too quick, because yes, value may be represented in exchange, but for sure it is not. One wrote Rubin. I said Rubin is always good. Why? Because in the second edition, Rubin said the value is in exchange. In the third edition, Rubin wrote the value is not. So it would be good for any. The other answer was Fred Mosley in his critique of Newberg. It's there. The quiz is there. I read on Saturday.
Question. Is what is money?
What is money?
Yeah.
Questions? What is money in general? What is money for Marx?
For you.
I think I said that. Money is at the same time finance and universal equivalent. As a universal equivalent, money can also be stored for many motives. But to have a universal equivalent and to have a demand for money as a liquid asset, you need to have money in the system. And theoretically, it's not clear who succeeded to do that, because the old neoclassicals had problems to have a demand for money because money is useless, its utility is only indirect. Between 1910 and 1930, they succeeded to have a utility of money, so money could be demanded. But why there should be a system in which money circulates? I don't think that you can just assume money is there. I don't believe in Mengerian kind of stories according to which money was born to ease exchanges, and you begin with commodities, not commodities, goods, which acquire progressively more power of exchangeability. So I think that to have money in the system properly, in a generalized way, you need to argue that production must be financed monetarily. Specifically, that capitalist production must be financed monetarily. So I interpret the beginning of Capital as a situation in which there are individual producers which exchange. At first, in the first three chapters, I don't know who are these individual producers, and I don't need to have any finance for production because I'm talking of goods that are already commodities produced. So in that world, money can be anything, also as a universal equivalent. But when I move from that world, the world of generalized commodity exchange, to the understanding that commodity exchange is generalized only if labor power is a commodity and there is capitalist production, at that point, if I am in a monetary economy, I must have a prior financing of this production. I cannot have a situation in which commodities are exchanged with money, but production is not. So the real problem is why Marx does not do that when he moves from chapter 4 to chapter 7. There are two answers. One is, oh, he is constructing the totality, so he will come back later at the end after volume 3, you go back to volume 1, and you have grounded Marx. There is a problem. I think, and probably Marx at the end of his life knew it, that the financial and banking sector was not too developed. So a theoretical analysis could not be properly developed. Probably I told you in front of a beer for you and a glass of wine for me, but I love a quote of Schumpeter in the History of Economic Analysis, in which he contrasts the so-called metalist position against the charterist position. The metalist position is that money is a commodity. The charterist position is that money by itself is not a commodity, which looks very much, this second position, it is related to the so-called modern monetary theory. Now, the theorists in the modern monetary theory, they call themselves neo-chartalists or neo-capitalists, love to say that actually historically money was never, and originally money is born as a debt. So there is the Hungarian story. Money begins as a good that becomes a commodity, etc. And there is the alternative story, money as a debt. Schumpeter in the footnote says, money was a commodity and existed and is born as a commodity. And he says, yes, but the nature of money is of being a commodity, and his answer is no. Why? Because he says, in the case of these social notions, they have to be analyzed at the most developed moment, not at the early historical moment. And that's my point. I don't care if there was originally a money which was there, which was a commodity. Because even the so-called commodity money system were non-commodity money system in disguise. There was a system in which money was a piece of social recognition, etc., with side by side as a kind of how to call it, collateral. This is said by Keynes, but there is a similar phrase in Schumpeter when he writes that the rupee is a banknote printed on silver. So for me, money is not a commodity. To analyze a monetary system, you have to understand from where money comes into the system. Then you have a monetary system, and you can also analyze money as a universal equivalent. But at this point, so I close the discussion before, when in this way of analyzing the capitalist system as I do, what is the movement from the inner to the out? It is not the movement from production as immediate production to circulation. It is the movement from the capital relation, which is buying and selling of labor power, plus immediate production, which is before, going forward to the eventual final monetary situation. Just one thing. Again, Luxembourg here is crucial because she posited the problem not far from this in her anti-critique.
In fact, there is also a question online. Yeah, shall we take one from the floor and then we go online? Yeah.
Perhaps related to your answer right now. I was wondering how do you conceptualize the role of the state in this whole interpretation? And because I'm thinking, on the one hand, the idea of how money functions actually in the monetary system, but also I would also think of the constitution of private labor in the first place through primitive accumulation. So I see the state as kind of being implicated in all these categories in one way or another. Can you elaborate that?
Let us take also that, and I answer.
So the question online is quite complex. So maybe Patrick, would you like to
intrinsic
share it?
First, I read, then I may ask to Patrick for clarification. Are intrinsic value and absolute value to different quantities? Should we identify money with abstract labor as Luxembourg does, or as in Hegel's logic of essence, is money the necessary expression of congealed abstract labor in something other than itself?
Sorry?
Do you want it?
If you can read for everyone.
If I can read for it, yeah, sure. Or which is why I wondered if Patrick wants to just express his question vocally. Patrick, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, is intrinsic value something that is a potential? Marx talks in some places in the contribution of the critique, for example, of latent value. And that's sort of behind that first part about could intrinsic value and absolute be two different quantities. But I also really wonder about that Luxembourg quote that flatly identifies money with abstract labor. It seems to me that the logic there is more complex. I think it's something like Hegel's logic of essence, where the essence must appear as something other than itself. I think that really kind of fits the logic of value and price. And also, I think in the last comment there written down, that it fits the processual character of value, which I think that's a very important point in your paper.
I answer to the questions in order. About the state, of course, it's a huge issue. The state is and is not there in Capital Volume 1 or in Capital in general. But it is there. The transition from universal equivalent to money is due to the state. The state is there for the fixing of the working day. We may go beyond and say that the state is there defining what we nowadays would call economic policy. According to my point of view, a good introduction to this problematic is Suzanne de Brunoff's State and Economic Policy, where she says that the state is not immediately capitalistic, but without the state, you would not have capital. First, because there is the management of the specific commodity labor power. And this has to do more or less with what you alluded to. Second, because there is always the need to the management of the other special commodity, which is money. Third, because of economic policy. Yeah, I would be stronger than de Brunoff, because I think that what is called laissez-faire capitalism never existed. When it existed, it was just because it was only Britain, and so laissez-faire was a specific kind of conquering the other markets. The gold standard, when it existed, was a managed system with a hierarchical setting, again in Britain. She insists, and I understand that, the change being due not only to the so-called dematerialization of money, but the state entering into the definition of effective demand, how effective demand is constructed, especially since the 30s. But from this point of view, we have never left that kind of world. The so-called neoliberal era, from my point of view, is not a return to laissez-faire. It existed. It is a very active system of managing also society, but also demand. It is a way of internally create a new source of effective demand, which is indebted consumption, to a process affecting monetary policy and asset. So the state is essential. It is not immediately capitalistic. It's not just the come si dice, the bourgeois last instance. About the question by Patrick. Intrinsic value is a ghost. So at first it is not a quantity. Absolute value is intrinsic value which has been externalized and is embodied in money as a commodity. I'm talking of Marx. So money is literally value embodied. Now I say, going back, that if money is value embodied, I can say that when I have the commodity and I have the commodity as value as content, I have the commodity also already as value as form. That is an ideal money. That is, the producers can account in quantity of hours what is this intrinsic value, but they can account because there is, I repeat, money as a commodity, and through the mediation of money external as an absolute value. So I do not see the opposition that you see between Luxembourg and what you call Hegel's logic of essence. Of course, look, I said Luxembourg, sorry, I hate that. This is German. It is Rosa Luxemburg. Well, Rosa Luxemburg, of course, in my view, was too quick. You are right in noticing that. But Rosa Luxemburg is saying that money is the real abstraction because it is the labor, congealed abstract labor of the commodity, which is mirrored in the concrete labor producing money as a commodity. So we are at the end of the process, not at the fluid living stage, but we are at the stage of the objectified magnitudes. You opposed to this vision the idea that there is an essence, and you say it is congealed abstract labor, which is expressed in something other than itself, let us say money. What I say is that you don't have this separation of essence on one side and manifestation of the other. You don't have an essence that you can analyze in itself and then say, this is the manifestation, because without the manifestation, you cannot say anything about the essence. Because what is that congealed abstract labor? It is an intrinsic value, it is a ghostly objectivity. So to do your expression of an essence expressing itself, you have to go through money. So this is not opposed to Luxembourg. Either you're saying something wrong, and I don't want to say that you are saying something wrong, or you are saying the same thing as Luxembourg. Simply, you are a more sophisticated interpreter 100 years after, and she was quickly expressing herself. I hope you understand what I am trying to say.
But if I may, yeah, I mean, I think the point of this kind of logic is that you don't have essence apart from appearance. So the idea, and that's why I say at the end, I think it fits in with the processual character. I think it also fits in with what you said, which I think is very important about the pricing prior to, right? So that the monetary is involved, the monetary aspect is involved all the way down. But that it seems to me is precisely what this kind of logic represents.
Yes, probably we are nearer than it seems.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, actually, I should say that Riccardo had sent me his paper after we had an exchange at last year's historical materialism conference. And I mean, actually, I don't agree with the interpretation of the particular passages in the theories of surplus value where Marx is talking about Bailey and so on. Actually, but I don't really want to go there. I actually think your original understanding of absolute value, as Marx uses it at that point, as intrinsic value is actually right, and he's not referring to money as absolute value. But I do think there's something very important that's raised by your analysis of money as autonomous and as processual, and in that sense I agree with Patrick Murray. And I think it's very important because, of course, what Marx does is he says value takes a succession of forms. In particular, it takes a commodity form, and then it takes a monetary form, and that is extended into the analysis of capital itself. So capital takes a commodity initially in the circuit, a monetary form, then a commodity form, then a productive form, and so on. Now, however, where I disagree, and it would take me too long to spell it out, although I've sent you some comments, as you know, is to just go back to this intrinsic value and its ghostly character. And I think I'm probably disagree with Patrick Murray on this as well, because you said it isn't a quantity, but actually Marx, it clearly has a material basis, which is the quantity of socially necessary labour time, which is the immanent measure of value, which Marx also develops in these comments on Bailey and Ricardo, as distinct from the external measure, which is money. And they have a different the commodity as value, as with an intrinsic value, and money as value have a different relationship to labour time in this way. I'll finish on this actually. I think the commodity, and here we're not talking about the individual commodity, we're talking about the mass of commodities that emerges from in a process of production. So the mass of cars of the same type have a socially necessary labour time, and you can calculate that as an average And I think it's founded in the productivity of labour. And I think for Marx, it's changes in the productivity of labour, which result in changes in social necessary labour time, which necessarily result in a change in the value of commodities. Whereas money relates to social labour time as a whole. It is, to use a phrase you quote actually, the incarnation of labour in general, universal labour within a particular economic space, of course, because it depends where. Now, I think you can, it's true that Marx develops his theory of money as commodity money. I think he was right to do so because that was the foundation of monetary systems in that period he was writing. But I think we can also talk about that relationship between money and social labour time simply on the basis of what's known as the money, the MELT, monetary expression of labour time, which people like Duncan Foley developed, and which actually is what Fred Mosley relies upon. And many other people rely upon it, and I certainly rely upon when I now think about these questions. I'll leave it there.
May I answer?
Yes, please.
Or the others?
There's one more, but I think, well, this is a short one.
There are two more.
No, this is another thing.
Ah.
So why can't we all proceed to reconstruction right away? I think debates on reading and interpretation usually generate splitting among Marxists. So this is Tiago Camarini asking.
Yes. We agree on many things, but we disagree on the important ones. In many things, yes, you are right that let us leave aside the individual commodity. We are talking of all the capitalistically produced commodities which are exchanged. I think that this debate is solved since the late 20s. Isaac Rubin, from the second digital edition, was rightly criticized. The debate, as you know, had many dimensions, but from the point of view strictly of the labor theory value, we realized that he was shifting too much towards a circulationist theory according to which value is created in exchange. So he produced, in my view, an almost not totally correct view of the abstraction of labor as a process, saying when we speak here of circulation, we are talking not of a specific phase, but of the totality production and circulation. So from that point of view, the discussion could be closed. Then from that, one can start with his own definitions and go along the way. It is usual among Marxists in different ways, like Fred, like Duncan, and so on, not to be worried by grounding the unity of commodities as both exhibitions and expressions of labor, only labor. And then one takes differences by Marx and says, oh, there is no need to prove anything. This is the same Marx that every time he began writing on value, he changed what he has written before. He never left that as it were. And this repeated question was, what is it? That is, Marx wants an answer to why only labor. Because if it is not that, for me, it is a form of religion. I am not interested in this form of religion. Into religion, I will go elsewhere. My argument is that the real Marx had money as a commodity, not because the monetary system was that one. This is repeated by everybody, included, unfortunately, by Michael. No, it's not my point. My point is that without money as a commodity, Marx's argument about the unity would not stand up. You begin with the Grundrisse. Then you go to a contribution. In a contribution, it is clear that Marx has there a contradiction. The contribution is the thing which is most similar to Heidegger, in which actually commodities must be already equal because there is exchange, but there must be exchange for them to be equal. And Marx declares the thing and does not resolve it, only that. Then he arrives, after the text, to the 61-63. In my view, in the discussion of Bailey and Riccardo, he is beginning to really focalizing the problem through the absolute value, and that is the beginning of the analysis leading to Capital Volume 1, the polarities on the form of value. The other complaints that
I think they can't hear you properly online, and I think the mic cannot move. So if you could please either stay around here, that would be better.
If you where I was, if you I don't want to begin again from the beginning. What we'll discuss. So the last things that I was answering to you.
You came to the 61 discussion of Bailey and Ricardo.
The polarities. Yes. What I reproach to most of this English debate on Marx and Bailey is that they discuss as if the 61-63 manuscripts and Capital were almost contemporary. In my view, this hides the development. So you see output value much better if you focalize on the 61-63 and then look at the movement to the polarities of value. And that is the real point. For me, I repeat, the problem is that if you don't have money as a commodity, the argument by Marx about the unity collapses. Then there is the other question, which is relevant. This has to do with the folly. Why don't we begin immediately from reconstruction? Why not? But if we begin immediately from reconstruction, we are not doing reconstruction. We just write down what we think. There is a friend of mine who has done that, and he is Chris Arthur. Chris Arthur now writes in his own system. Yes, there's Hegel, there is Marx, but he does with this material whatever he wants. And by the way, of all the English authors, the only one who is nearer to my analysis of absolute value is, there are huge differences on money as a commodity, this and that. But in fact, the notion of absolute value of Chris Arthur is parallel to the notion of absolute value that I find in Marx. So it is possible. What Foley calls the new interpretation is in fact a reconstruction. It is not an interpretation. It is based on this and that in Marx. If you go, however, that way, you have a problem. If you begin with the reconstruction in that way, you start asking not only why labor, Because to that, I think I provide to the new interpretation the answer. The point is not just why labor. The point is why value. Because if you look at what it is written by Duncan Foley, especially, and his followers in the last 15 years, I think, it is clear that their doubt is, but why this guy Marx began with volume 1 and values proportionate to labor content? Fred has an answer that to me is science fiction, because the answer by Fred is, but no, capital volume 1 is already in terms of prices of production. No, it's he defines the categories of Marx in a way that they immediately there is a compatibility with volume 3. And at this point, why it is
swimming pool?
why it is compatible?
I'm a city senior.
Yeah. I think that's what I run.
Why it is interaction are a bit problematic in reasoning like this.
Yeah, it's with Fred Mosley.
Yes, I know. So it is science fiction because it is very unusual. If Marx proceeded in this way, he should have written somewhere in the footnotes these value quantities actually are price quantities. They are not. And rightly so, Duncan Foley does not go that way. But you have to explain to me why you redefine the categories anyhow in volume 1 in a way that the accounting in volume 3 is okay. Well, what Duncan writes. And then he has to invent why this, why that. In my reasoning, it is very clear why volume 1 is in value as labor content. Because it is a construction from the individual dimension to the total dimension. When you are at the total dimension, the macro logic is opposed to the micro logic, and there you have the class relation between capital as a whole and the working class as a whole. Capital as a whole, capital volume 1 shows how extract living labor from the workers. It is shown how capital as a whole has to give back a quantity of labor contained in the real wage of the class. So the end of capital volume 1 is encapsulated in one exchange ratio. The price of that new money value added versus the price of the wage, both in labor contained. So the rate of exploitation, volume 1, at the class level is in labor contained. So it is very clear. That is Marx volume 1, the constitutions of the givens, which is the constitutions of the givens of any theory. It is the constitution of the givens of Sraffa as well as Foley, Mosley, Sraffa, all begins when the production process is ended. When the production process is ended, values as labor contained are irrelevant, redundant. So I have an answer. What is the answer? Why Marx, as he says, does not begin immediately from prices of production? Yes, I know all the arguments, and one may speak of essence, appearance, form, all complicated. I can learn that language. I have done that for 40 years. But why do I have to believe that? There is an answer by Fred. You do this, and then go check. This is not too far from climate. There is something out there. We can check the explanatory power. And Fred says, Marx would win hands down over them both. No, I want to know why labor is the only content of them. Otherwise, Marx is a prophet. Would there be
Thank you,
please
Riccardo.
still? Yes.
Yeah, this is more housekeeping. Okay, shall we take one more question? Maybe from the floor, maybe online. Yes, please.
Thanks very much indeed. I must admit that I'm struggling. My thoughts are ill-formed. In fact, they may be totally confused and irrelevant. But one of the things that occurs to me is that during the 1920s, cigarettes in Germany were a form of exchange. Now, those are products that embodied labor. And another thing that occurs to me when you mentioned that Marx was saying that a commodity, in this case, choosing a cigarette would be a commodity, only has intrinsic value when it's exchanged. But I'm just trying to think. Say something like a hedge that keeps sheep and cattle in. That has value to the extent that presumably that the people who would otherwise have to keep the cattle and sheep on the land could do something else. But as the hedges are growing, some of the wood of that actually can be become sold off, doesn't that? I have to confess, I'm just so completely confused. I know that it's really perfect.
I studied economic theory because I didn't understand what I was doing. So I was reading Sweezy and Dobb, and I did not understand. So I said, okay, if I try, I begin to study economic theory, maybe I will see something. Two things. If I have understood what you are saying. Of course, it depends on the kind of methodology that one has in mind. My methodology is strictly logical. That is, I am not constructing the categories in an historical way. I think that Marx actually was the theorist of this mode of production. So the critique of political economy and all the notions that are there are valid strictly only for this mode of production. And the Schumpeter point before, in this logical analysis of capitalism, you begin with the most developed form. So, for example, take in another word altogether, Vicky Chick on banking. Vicky Chick on banking has this analysis in which banks begins as intermediator of saving and then progressively become creator of savings. I will do the same trick that I did with the commodity money. I don't believe this. I believe that banks are always creating from ex nihilo, logically. Then my duty is to explain in a capitalist world what was happening before in this scheme, and I think it can be done, but that's maybe. If I understood again well your reference to the 20s and the cigarettes in Germany, that's very intriguing. Every time I do this exercise of going to read Marx, and when I read, my attitude is, let us read this almost as I don't know what from previous readings. I very often, I am almost convinced, and I'm there, so I turn the pages thinking, now the guy convinced me. So all the problems are gone. This also for a very simple reason, that even if you don't believe, as I do not believe, in money as a commodity, as an essential category in analyzing either the monetary systems or the value theory, even if this is not true, in the way Marx develops the argument, there is a lot which is gained there. And it would be stupid to jettison money as a commodity and jettison all the good things that Marx said. Now, it is clear in the first 3 chapters that he progressively poses money as a commodity, and then that money as a commodity is shifted, seems to be not essential anymore, and it reappears after, and so on, so on, so on. So that in the end, in the world system, exchanges may even go on without money as a commodity, except that there is a certain point in which there are the monetary system collapses, and in the world crisis, the only form of absolute wealth, absolute value, is money. That Marx thinks this money as a commodity. This is not stupid at all, because in the crisis of the monetary system, something like this happens, maybe not in gold or in oil or in them, but happens in this way. But it is the collapse of the monetary system. So what happened in the 2021-22 could be analyzed by Austrian economists like von Mises or von Hayek in a way parallel to Marx. That is, the idea was, now there are the banks can create money ex nihilo. This creates progressively a violent instability, also because the state goes in, etc. And at this point, there should be, they say, a readjusting mechanism automatic in the system, on the real side, actually. But what happens is that humans can stop this automatic readjustment mechanism. So the train goes quicker and quicker into the disaster. And when there is a disaster, what happens? You go back to money as a commodity. You go back to commodities. You go back to products. You go back to cigarettes. I think that in the whole argument there are a lot of errors, but this happens in history, and it happens more and more. So what I'm saying is that one thing is to analyze the role of money in the theory of value, and one thing is money in the general system. In the theory of value, I think that Marx was a genius because he realized that you can't speak of value without contemporary speaking of money. And that's something which has to be reproduced. At the same time, Marx, because he wanted the link with labor, not because of the historical circumstances, was there needing money as a commodity for a theoretical reason. About the monetary system, yes, of course, Marx was in a particular historical situation, and he recognized that, and we all know that in the third volume, what is there was just notes which were rearranged in a systematic way too much by Engels. And then when journalists went to Marx asking why are not you publishing the second or the third volume, he said the second, because at the time he thought to publish all in one volume. His answer was, I cannot. Why? Because there is a big crisis, especially in England now beginning, and I have to wait that all ends. So I understand the mechanism, especially on the financial side. So he knew that there was something to work about. So there is an easiest way to answer why not to start from reconstruction, because I am not as bold as Chris. So I want to go with Marx, that I have seen reason. That's easy. Yes.
I think that's all from online, and I think unless there's any final pressing question, I think we can all thank Riccardo for his very thought-provoking chats.
I can close like I opened yesterday at Goldsmith.
Yes.
You can't convince them confused.
Well, that was successful. Thank you very much. And for everyone, both online and in the room, so this meeting, this talk has been recorded. It'll be posted on the seminar's YouTube channel very soon. And yeah, please keep in touch. You have the email, you have the lists, you have the Twitter, the Facebook, everything. Thank you everyone for joining. And we're going to the pub. Yes, exactly.
We stop at the